Before we talk about management costs, veterinarian, biological management, feeding, etc., we are already $800 million out of pocket. Some 23 out of 33 range states have lost all their rhino under a CITES ban. We are seeing declining populations in South Africa. The situation would be much worse if it was not for the positive intervention by the private reserves. Back in 2014, we, the private reserves, only owned some 25% of the national herd. Well, that's changed quite dramatically, and the latest figures are showing that we are in actual fact in excess of 50% of the national herd. So what you've got is a declining population in national parks and in certain provincial reserves, and you're seeing a substantive growth in private reserves. And so, in fact, the population is actually flatlining, and that is of concern. It's concern because the pure economics of rhino conservation is such that it simply no longer makes sense. If you analyze what is the rhino poaching tsunami cost South Africa, first of all, in terms of the loss of excess of 8,000 rhino, add to that the productivity, the production loss of some 8,000 rhino over the last period of time, 10 years, and then also the current devaluation, which is some 67% from 2014 to date. If you put those three figures together, you come to an alarming figure of some $700 million. Add to that now what we're paying in security, again over the 10-year period I've described. I calculate a figure of about $100 million. So before we talk about management costs, veterinarian, biological management, feeding, etc., we are already $800 million out of pocket. So the net result is that there's very little interest in investment in rhino, purely because of the high risk and obviously the management cost, the security that has to be applied to looking after the species. Here at CITES, we are frustrated insofar as there's little empathy and understanding for the South African situation, which is a success module based on sustainable utilization. So we're faced with a scenario here of one size fits all. That's bad enough when you talk about the European and North American attitude towards Africa. But even within Africa, the elephant poaching problems of East Africa, the giraffe declining numbers, also in East and Central Africa, are certainly not the problems that we see in the SADC region, where we have, particularly with elephant, we have a problem insofar as we have more elephant than have habitat for. We're seeing an increasing level of human-wildlife conflict, and that has to do with obviously the basic economics of it all, rural communities having crop destruction, and so it carries on and on. So the situation is not good by any measure, and we are not seeing a very sympathetic international community towards our needs. We see a high level of arrogance in decision making. We see a terrible influence of animal rights NGOs. We are very aware of the need for rural community involvement in rhino conservation. And in actual fact, going back to the so-called Committee of Inquiry, which was commissioned by the Department of Environmental Affairs, there was a very strong approach to the committee through the public participation process for community involvement in rhino conservation. So that can be a direct and an indirect intervention. So we certainly are very supportive of, and there are a number of reserves that are already engaging in conservation initiatives with communities, and we are looking similar to the very successful model that you see in Namibia, where you have these so-called custodian programs. There's if one looks at the Black Rhino Expansion Program, the so-called BREP program, again a very good example, a template as to how it could be done. So we don't want to go and reinvent the wheel. We will certainly learn from the Black Rhino Range Expansion Program successes and try to implement a similar module with white rhino. When you look at the Black Rhino Expansion Program, the module is a very simple one. We would identify a particular property, and then there would be stringent criteria laid in terms of how those populations are to be managed and obviously how they are to be secured. Once that particular property has had all the necessary boxes ticked, you would introduce into that property, that environment, a core population, let's say 15 animals. And the condition would be that at a time in the future, 15 animals could be removed for purposes of repopulation elsewhere. So depending on how successfully that seed population breed, you would start off with 15 animals. Over a period of time, they may grow to 25 animals. You would remove then 10 animals at a time in the future and use those 10 and another 5 from another property and repeat the process, as long as you never remove the core population of 15. And the community would enjoy the benefit of then the surplus animals once the, so to say, the original 15 have been repaid. So they would always enjoy the retained growth after the 15 have been repatriated. And it's a very self-liquidating process, so you don't always have to wait for another 15. We could take 5, 5, and 5 and create 15 for a new population relocation. So we have land available through land redistribution that has already taken place by the South African government. But however, on the management and infrastructure side, we need funding. So we're talking about fences, we need a management structure in place, security, and so it carries on. Those rural communities don't have it, and we certainly would be prepared to support it, but conditional on that revenue coming from some form of commercial trade in rhino horn. We simply don't have money. There are a number of reserves that have already sold all of their rhino because of risk and cost, and there are a number of reserves that are facing bankruptcy as a result of not being able to sell rhino and simply not being willing to abandon their conservation initiatives. So the situation is not good.